Okay, well, welcome everybody for joining this webinar. This is part of a series that that we are running at the CLA, looking at the joined-up approach to natural capital. Some of you may well have been on our first introductory session last week, chaired by Judy Cale-Hammond, our Director of Policy, and there's going to be a number throughout the year, both online and in person. My name is Mark Bridgman and I am President of the CLA, and I'm going to be chairing this afternoon's session. I will be joined in a moment by our two panelists, Professor Andrew Lovett from the University of East Anglia and Martin Lyons, who chairs the Nature Friendly Farming Network. They each have a few slides, and they will each do a short presentation discussing the subject. They will then have a discussion with me, and then we will open it up to questions from you. As far as questions, you'll see, I'm sure you're all used to this now, but at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. If you type in your question there, then we will try and get to as many questions as we can during the session. And I should also just mention that today's session will be recorded, so that delegates who aren't able to watch it can watch it afterwards or go back over it. And on that subject, last week's introductory session, which was extremely good, is on the CLA website, the New Look CLA website, which was launched last week as well. So please do follow that along with all the other good CLA events. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Andrew as our first speaker. And thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you, Mark, for your introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about very briefly the concept of natural capital and some of the work we've been doing with a range of organisations in Norfolk and Suffolk to assess the natural capital assets of the two counties. So firstly, well, what exactly do we mean by natural capital? Well, you can think about it in terms of the stocks of assets. You can see this on the left-hand side of the diagram on the slide. So you might think of the stocks of natural capital in terms of soil, water, vegetation, habitats, species, and so forth. Those stocks of natural capital provide a series of flows of services. So that's things like food, fish, timber, minerals, clean water, clean air, landscape value, different species, carbon sequestration, and so on and so forth. And those different services ultimately provide a range of benefits to business and society which have values. And you can think about those values in monetary terms, or you can think about them in a broader sense. That framework of thinking about natural assets and the benefits and assets that they provide is a way of trying to incorporate the natural environment more holistically in our decision making, in thinking about particularly about options and plans and change, and thinking about the natural environment alongside man-made human infrastructure, skills, expertise, and so forth in an integrated way. And why is this important? Well, this approach is now becoming very central to the delivery of government policies, particularly the National 25-Year Environment Plan. It's linked very strongly with ideas in the Agriculture Act that was approved by Parliament last year, and in the Environment Bill that's currently going through Parliament, And one of the things that's coming out of this is the government's new approach to agri-environmental schemes, particularly the environmental land management scheme. And so the emphasis on these approaches is opening up all sorts of new opportunities and possibilities in terms of public and private sector funding for farmers and land managers, in terms of both public sector schemes like the new ELMS scheme, or income streams from, say, biodiversity net gain or carbon credits and so forth. So appreciating this approach and understanding natural assets on your land and in a region, I think, is going to become increasingly important in terms of developing and diversifying income streams for landowners and managers in the future. So we can go on to the next slide, please. A piece of work that I've been particularly involved in the last 18 months has been working with a group of organisations, particularly the county councils for Norfolk and Suffolk, but the local authorities, the districts, a whole range of NGOs, the NFU, the CLA, many different organisations, to try and provide a baseline of natural assets in the two counties, what exists, where, what quality is it, and how do the assets of the two counties compare, for instance, with the assets elsewhere in England, and how are they distributed across the two counties, for instance, across different administrative areas or within key natural areas like the Breckland, the Broads, the Norfolk and Suffolk coasts, and so on and so forth. So what we were asked to do was produce a compendium of the evidence that existed on the quantity and quality of different natural assets across the two counties. So that was intended to provide a baseline for a lot of this work, to help local organizations start to identify what was important about the natural assets in the area, and to develop priorities for initiatives and actions going forward. So this was completed last year. It's publicly available. On the slide there, you can see the link to one of the sources for downloading it, which is the Norfolk Biodiversity website. It's quite a big PDF document, but it's been laid out in such a way that you can go quite quickly to individual pieces of information. So to give you an overview of what the evidence compendium looks like, this slide just gives you a sense of what we've tried to cover. So we've provided an introduction to the idea of natural capital. We've provided some regional context, but then the heart of it is the natural asset inventory, where we've taken 6 sort of key categories of assets related to land, soil and subsurface, habitats and species, freshwater, coast and marine and atmosphere, and then headings underneath each of those. You can go directly to those pages and you'll see a single page on each of those assets, usually with at least one map of where they are across Norfolk and Suffolk, a comparison where appropriate with elsewhere in England, and some statistics on summary information. We've looked at the risks, both now and in the future, to those classes of asset. And then we've tried to build from that in terms of, well, what's the implications of this for the two counties? I should say that in putting this compendium together, nearly all the information we've used is publicly available, and many of the sources that we've used are actual national in coverage. So although what we've done covers Norfolk and Suffolk, you could put exactly the same information together for other parts of England. So there's an awful lot of data there. And just to give you a little sense of the kind of things that we've done, if we can just go on to the last slide, please. This is something that we did to try and put Norfolk and Suffolk into a national context. So from all the assets that we were looking at, we tried to identify a number where Norfolk and Suffolk were particularly significant on a national scale. So the two counties are about 7% of the land area of England and about 3% of the English population. And we were able to identify 10 different assets where Norfolk and Suffolk were at least 10%, sometimes more, of the English total asset. And you can see little maps of them on the slide here. And I think one of the striking things is how just diverse they are. So we've got things that are related to production, high quality agricultural land, particularly important for food production, productive forest, certain key types of habitat, lowland heath, salt marshes, wetlands, key areas of peat, chalk rivers, very highly productive aquifers, key for water resources. And then in the coast, international conservation designations of many types and marine protected areas. In other words, what this highlights is just how important Norfolk and Suffolk are on a national scale in terms of many of these key types of national assets. And one of the reasons for doing that was to provide the baseline of information that organizations in the region could use to help build applications to national funding schemes, highlighting the importance in their local region of assets that are significant nationally. So that's the kind of thing that we've tried to do. We're currently working on taking those assets and producing more specific guides for 4 protected landscapes in Norfolk and Suffolk. So that's the North Norfolk coast, the Broads, the Suffolk coast and heaths, and Dedham Vale. And I'm now just starting to work with the same group of stakeholder organizations in the region. And we're now working on a series of demonstrator projects and a route map to develop a local 25-year environment plan. So thank you very much. And I'll now pass on to Martin Lyons, who's the UK chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network.
And thank you very much. So I'm a farmer in Cambridgeshire, and much of the focus of what we produced is changing. In the past, as a farmer, as a business, we've been told to produce lots of food, as high as possible yields as possible. And as I actually really started to understand the soil, the landscape, and actually the true productivity of the assets I hold, I can produce more from them and it'll be more profitable and sustainable. Actually, we need farmers to see themselves and land managers as asset managers. Some of that will be good for food production, and some of that will be natural capital delivery and various other things. And as our focus, or my focus now, is to produce as much as possible from that asset I have available in what I manage in my day-to-day farming operations for all the goods and services that the public are now asking for. The food, as well as the access, the natural capital, and all the other goods and services. Next slide, please. So as a farmer, I use lots of data. We can capture data within the field, and the pictures or images on your left-hand side is the different soil quality within a field. We can adjust seed rate. We can put precision nutrients applications. But some of the most exciting images I can get is coming off the combine, and the images on the right. The green is the highest yielding, which is profit. The red is the lowest yielding, usually a loss. Much of our landscape isn't very good for producing profitable yields And particularly as we change to a farming system and payment structure, we need to get the best from that asset. And if we've got lots of red area within a cropping system, what else can we deliver with it? Where else can I get better value from it? And as farmers, we can deliver wildlife connectivity and more natural capital across the landscape. It's about assessing what you have on your farms and on your estates and the land you have available. What else could you deliver? Where else could that fit in? So for me, it was about connectivity of wildlife and habitats through to my neighbours and looking at the local and national priorities that I can deliver and get financial reward from that actually assists my business. By having additional pollinator strips and habitat delivery, we actually no longer use insecticides because the landscape works with me. And it really is about using nature to enhance the business and getting value from nature. And how do you can use buffer zones and other pieces. So much of my core costs are maintaining our environment. And as we deliver more natural capital and that connectivity through the landscape, how do I get added value from it? And how can I afford to manage those aspects and get value? So the images on our left are livestock fencing, but you could call them environmental protection fencing, and we can get capital grants from governments to put that in place. The same as hedgerows. They have dual purpose, carbon, biodiversity, future values that we can market. And as we work together within a landscape or within a cluster, we can assess the capital assets for the natural capital we could trade out and offer to other people and other organisations. Next slide, please. So things farmers and land managers really need to deliver in the future. It's about protecting and enhancing what we currently have on farms and looking at the value we can deliver for our own businesses, but also for the wider landscape and what value commercially that will have. Delivering and increasing more trees, hedgerows, natural biodiversity. What revenue streams can they deliver us now in the short term, but also in the longer term? What marketing opportunities can that give us as a business operating? Monitor and improve the biodiversity and the nature we have on farms. Can you do some baseline levels so we know we can prove we're delivering more? And actually this feeling part of a wider delivery, being part of a network of farmers or a cluster in a catchment area and working out and engaging with your community to demonstrate value for money of what we're trying to deliver as farmers and connect with our communities around us. Having that flexible delivery approach and thinking differently and actually delivering different things on different farms. That doesn't mean every single farm has to put 5 ponds in, but certain farms may have the room to put a number in, but we can connect those up across a landscape or across a wider estate if you're managing an estate. We really need to understand the different income streams that can benefit for us within our businesses. I run a business and it really is, I need an income stream to be profitable and benefit the growth of my business, but it's about balancing the assets I can deliver across the wider landscape. Next slide, please. So for many farmers, there are many barriers. It's understanding what we're being asked for now and what will be the opportunities and be asked for in the future. We've been used to a very solid system under the CAP system. We're moving now to ELMS and public money for public goods, but also private money for assets. Through the environmental bill, we'll see biodiversity and natural capital offsetting through developments. How can we offer as land managers and farmers that service or that natural capital that others are needing to deliver? And how can we value it at a true cost for us to deliver? And how do we help change farmers' mindset and land managers' mindset? Life isn't all about food production. It's about food, fibre, energy, natural capital, biodiversity. There's many more needs and requests that are going to be coming from us and to us. And actually that long-term financial reward, it's not just about the delivery of the asset, it's how do we manage it, maintain it, and get a long-term financial reward in the future. But also having conscious thinking about if we're going to put lots of trees in or change the land use, how does that change our value asset? How does that affect our taxation, our valuing, and what future funding streams can that deliver for our business, whether that's getting timber or fibre from that product? There really is a lot of concern about increased public access and the problems that can bring. Many have seen increased fly tipping, hair coursing and poaching problems. How can we put that connectivity and natural capital in place, but also engage and communicate to the public about their rights and responsibilities of accessing the countryside, but also keeping out the problem people and all things that can happen. And it's about really communicating the message of what we can do and where people are good to have when there's not much ground nesting birds, and why they should definitely keep their dogs on leads when there's livestock about, or in that period of time when there's lots of ground nesting birds. We need to communicate that message stronger. We really need a true cost for our environmental management. We're seeing under the SFI, the Sustainable Farming Initiative, and the talk from government within England of income foregone kind of cost management. We don't want that. We can't have that. We actually need to value the natural assets we have and we can deliver at a true market value. And that doesn't mean just greenwashing it. It's about what it really costs and what benefits it delivers to me as a business and how can it enhance my business, but also how it delivers benefit for wider landscape and for public and society. And on that, I shall finish. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much. Well, we're going to now have a discussion, and then we'll open up to questions from all of you, from the participants. So please do put any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Perhaps I could make a start by just talking about how we as farmers and land managers should make a start. How do we start going about measuring our natural capital? It can be a very expensive process on the one hand, or it can be a very basic thing on the other. I wonder if I could just ask each of you from your perspectives how you would recommend, how you would advise land managers to make a start on understanding what their natural capital assets are. Andrew.
Okay, so one of the things I would say is that there are a number of reports like the evidence compendium I've just discussed. So Natural England have produced natural capital atlases for each county in England. They are publicly available. The data behind them is available. So if anyone wanted information for their local area, that's an obvious place to start. The thing I would say is that a very great amount of necessary information is now publicly available in a way it wasn't 10 years ago. So with the evidence compendium work we did, all bar 2 data sources were open data. They were things that are available through sites like data.gov.uk. If you look at our report, we've got a list in the back of all the links that we used. So there is an awful lot of information out there. It's fair to say that the quality varies a little bit, and especially the detail, the spatial scale of it. But there's a much bigger information resource for people to draw upon than was the case a few years ago, and it will get much better in the next few years. Okay,
Martin?
Many of us have already got lots of information. If we've been in any stewardship schemes in the past, you'll have maps of where you delivered assets and what assets you've got. You'd have had reports done to create those schemes. Also, in the data systems we have, if you're on Gatekeeper, My Farm, the farm record stuff, you can add it into there. Many of them are now adding aspects to the edge of the field, so we can collect that data. And I think it's really important as farmers, land managers, to start thinking about doing land management plans and looking at what have we got, what could I deliver, where is my productivity on different things, and build up that evidence case as you answer the questions of what you've got on your own estate.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess one of the challenges with all of this is a number of us might have been doing different environmental schemes for many years, but we never actually measured what we were doing. When you think about sort of measuring baselines, how detailed do you think it needs to be? Do you think it's about just measuring areas, or do you think we need to be counting butterflies? I mean, what's the degree of baseline recording you think we should be doing on our as land managers?
So I would say any information's good. Got to start somewhere, and this is going to be about a journey, and everyone's in a different position. So I've been welcoming volunteers to come and do bird counts, butterfly counts, species recording, because they get pleasure out of it, and it gives me data. And data is king, because we need to know what we've got, and then the journey of that. So whatever you can get through public information or through recording on your farm, that's going to be a benefit in the future.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with you on that sort of citizen science thing. You know, I've had someone help me on my current stewardship application, ex-RSPB. He was really keen to come out and do some bird surveys, which helped reinforce the message that I was trying to give in my application. Andrew, your fantastic maps of all of those assets across Norfolk and Suffolk. If you're in a bit of that white space, and you've got a bit of land that some people might say is, you know, doesn't have any of those sort of exciting assets, does that put you at a big disadvantage? I mean, what would you be doing? How would you be advising someone who doesn't have some of those, you know, best in class, best in country assets to sort of anchor around?
Okay, I think the white space is still very, very important, because even if a particular asset is not necessarily present there, the area may be, for example, upstream in a river catchment, so that what happens in that area will be influencing what happens downstream. And also, we are in an era of change. We are needing to think about how we make our landscapes more resilient, for instance, to climate change. We need to think about ways of improving connectivity in the landscapes. And actually, some of the biggest potential benefits for nature recovery and nature enhancement may be in the areas where actually, for example, there are not particularly pristine habitats at the moment, but there might be land which could be very amenable to conversion through the sorts of funding opportunities that are going to come along in the next few years.
Yeah.
I'll add to that. The white space may be a space the data hasn't been collected in yet, because somebody hasn't been allowed on to look to see if you've got a rare butterfly bee or whatever. So that goes back to that data is really king, and it's about understanding what you've got and what you should have within your landscape. And if you can get a recording of something, that will help you prove a delivery later.
Maybe we can move on to timescales. You know, we've been talking about natural capital for a few years, and all of these private markets that are going to emerge. But it always seems to be just over the next ridge. Obviously, we've got elms coming forward slowly but surely. I mean, it won't be fully in place till end of 24. Where do you see, taking elms aside, the public one, of the private opportunities, which do you see as being the most tangible in the next 3 to 5 years?
I would have said the opportunities related to the Environment Bill and biodiversity net gain and biodiversity offsetting. Personally, I think that legislation and what it requires in terms of, you know, a 10% biodiversity uplift. If you're thinking about this part of the world and some of the proposals we have for new house building and infrastructure and so forth, there's big opportunities and challenges there. I think that's one. I think carbon credits and offsetting, that's another. That I think is still an evolving market, but I think there'll be a big change in the biodiversity net gain area in the next few years.
And I'd say that already we're seeing many developers asking farmers or asking other land managers to deliver things like skylight plots from that development area. The value is very poor and a short-term delivery. So the market's building, but we've really got to value that asset that's been taken away on a development, because if you take 100 trees off an ancient woodland, putting 120 trees on a field is not the same for wildlife and biodiversity. We really need to value that natural capital in a really true biodiversity sense, not just in a monetary sense.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. That biodiversity net gain point, Andrew. I mean, it's going to be statute. It's going to be legally binding. I mean, some counties around the country are already doing it, and by next year it will be mandatory. You talked about carbon being evolving. There's so much talk about carbon. In our CLA meetings, we're always talking about it and the evolving carbon markets. But it's complicated. My concern is that as land managers, we could be sucked into it too early, and we could be, it could be the crown jewels that we're selling too soon at way too low a price, for example, or that somehow, if you sell your carbon and then you have to turn around and supply carbon neutral food, you can't do it. What's your view on the evolving carbon markets and how they might play out?
I think they still have some way to go. I mean, there are carbon calculators available to farmers and land managers. They seem to be rather different in their scope. They're different things that they include. So I think there's still definitely a phase of evolution to happen in that area. And if I was a big land manager, I would be a bit cautious about sort of selling on carbon credits now for precisely the reasons you've just said.
Yeah.
And many of those carbon measuring tools give us different results. We need a standardization in how and what we measure. And actually, if we're going to trade carbon, that means as a business, we've got to be sub-zero. We hear about net zero for the agricultural land use area. We've actually got to go net zero as quickly as possible to have the ability to trade any surplus. And then where does, as you say, that food product or other services, where's the carbon valued in what comes onto my business through the inputs, and then what goes out? And I think it's about getting a carbon audit done, whichever tool you like to choose, to just think about where you are in your level, and then the assets you need to change to deliver that opportunity in the future while the markets grow.
Yeah, I certainly found doing a carbon calculator on my farm here last year, making the most of students, children being locked here, making them do it. It was very interesting to see what the real key drivers were. Some things you thought would be really big and weren't, and vice versa. But yeah, I think you're right. The point is, if you've got people like Waitrose saying they were only going to be buying from net zero farms, we need to make sure that we're getting our own sort of house in order before we sell, as you say. Martin, you talked about collaboration and the importance of that. And certainly as we look towards the government schemes, particularly local nature recovery and landscape recovery, the two top tiers, if you like, not SFI, but collaboration will almost certainly be a key part of that. How do you see that evolving, and what advice do you have to farmers and land managers?
Join a cluster. That doesn't mean you have to join the farmer next door, land manager. You may not get on with them, but within the landscape, join some people together. Find someone who can facilitate that if possible. Because that also, if you're all delivering a pollen and nectar mix, you can share a piece of machinery across all those that group of clusters. So there is some savings within it. But also then you can look at what you've got as a cluster, as a team, and what you can deliver for a water company, for public access, for all sorts of things, and how you could market that to the local developer. As an individual farmer, that has less value. Put 20 or 10 farms together and go to a developer or somebody else, you can really have an impact in what you can deliver. But also the sharing the knowledge of how it works on a farm. This peer-to-peer learning about doing things differently, so you don't all make the same mistakes, and accelerating the learning of delivering the different approach.
Okay. I mean, Andrew, from an academic point of view, where do you see the sort of power of that sort of collaboration? And do you think you should be rewarded for collaborating, or do you think it should be a sort of, that's what allows you into some of these schemes?
No, I think collaboration is extremely important. And I think one of the plus points of what we know about ELMS so far is that there's going to be much more emphasis on collaboration. I think from the experience of the cluster farms initiatives, to get collaboration to work, you've got to have a good and appropriate person as a coordinator. So that's really important as well. And I think one of the other things that's going to be important is for people to sort of look to build collaboration, and possibly over a rather wider network than might have been the case in the past. So, you know, think about the possible links with NGOs, with water companies, with other elements of the food supply and processing chain, and so on and so forth, with local government. There may be, to apply for some of these, the higher tiers of something like ELMS, the landscape recovery. My sense is that that's going to really require coalitions of organizations to put together applications that are going to carry weight and be successful on a national scale. So that's going to need some initiative starting now to start to put land managers in a position to be part of those applications in 2 or 3 years' time. That was one of the reasons we did the evidence compendium that we've done, to sort of start to provide the evidence base to allow those sorts of coalitions to be built.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. That landscape, what I've been seeing, sort of the early signs of this, talking to DEFRA on the landscape recovery, is that they really want to, they don't want to crowd out the private sector. They want to create a tool where public money, the ELMS money, can work alongside the private sector. I mean, the jargon is stacking, the idea that you can stack benefits on the same bit of land, that you could be, you know, selling your carbon to one person, you could be selling your water protection benefits to somebody else, and you could be doing farmland birds for the government, as it were. We're a long way from getting there, but that's certainly the aspiration. So I've got one more question, and please do put your questions in the chat bar, in the Q&A bar, sorry, not the chat bar. Just on this point of stacking and ranking of natural capital, how do you go about, you know, where do you think we should be focusing our energy, or is it just trying to find everything we've got? Do you think there'll be some things that are going to be things that we should really be focusing on because we're going to get more bang for our buck and we're going to be able to make more of a difference? Or do you think it really depends on, you know, land parcel by land parcel?
Some of it is inevitably going to be location specific. It's bound to be. I think things to do with soil and carbon and so forth, I think those are an obvious asset to try and look and develop. That makes sense from the food and livestock production side. It makes sense from the carbon sequestration side. If you're thinking about how you try and assess value, there are certain types of assets and services that, to be honest, at the moment are easier to place monetary values on than others. There are ways of trying to do it for carbon. There are ways of trying to do it in terms of water supply and water quality. There are ways of trying to do it for recreation. Trying to do it for some aspects of biodiversity is at the moment very much the research frontier.
Yeah, yeah.
I think very much of its individual businesses understanding where they are and what they want to do or what they can do at the moment, but what benefits their business. So if you've got a lot of soil loss, you may be penalised for that in the future. So how do you build a buffer zones in alongside water courses, have more pollinators within a landscape to improve soil health? So what are the things you need to do to make your business better and use that delivery tools, and what finance you can get to help deliver that, either through ELMS or private finance? And then you look at the bigger picture of where am I in the landscape in my local community, within my catchment, what is the local and national goals that may be coming in my direction, and what else can I offer to, you know, build to get that opportunity on my farm? So,
I mean, Martin, on your own personal situation, what are the things where you're personally focusing your energies?
Soil health, moving to a regenerative system, a mixed livestock system to bring in free fertility, wider buffer zones, pollinators through the middle of the crop, every third or fourth tram line. Really sort of thinking about how do we put nature into the farm, not just around the outsides. but also as I'm planting trees and hedges over the next few years, who can help me plant them, as in funding them, but also engaging the community to come and plant them because they can get engaged with what we're doing, and then look at the marketing opportunity of those trees and hedges in the future. So it's trying to look at what can I fit in my business now on the land I have available. Some of it's rented, some of it's owned. So you've got to balance those needs and who's the asset is, who's responsible for the asset. And then we've also got sort of flood mitigation and water quality. So really is trying to look at all the things I can do. And as a business, I can only do so much per year. And it's trying to fit it into my cash flow and in my business plan to think how I can build in the future.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'm going to stop there and turn to some of the questions that we've started to get. Please do put any questions you have in the Q&A bar for Martin or Andrew. So I'm going to start. First question is from William Cubitt. And he's asked, so far we've heard of emerging opportunities for specific new natural capital income streams, such as biodiversity net gain and the developing elms. But what has happened to the big strategic influences, such as polluter pays? Andrew, do you want to have a...
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I think some of those will change again. The Environment Bill is setting up an office for environmental protection. So there's going to be new frameworks around that. I mean, the polluter pays principle, as has been said, is been there for a long time. It's a matter of enforcement, and it's a matter. I think in a lot of cases, it's a matter of monitoring. We are better at monitoring certain sorts of things than we were 5 or 10 years ago. A lot of the information we have is very snapshot-like and doesn't necessarily represent change as well as it perhaps could or certainly should.
Okay. I'm going to take the next question. Water supply security is becoming a high risk for England's water companies. Water companies are already paying farmers to address water quality, but do you see land management change to improve aquifer recharge as a significant opportunity for the future? Would either of you like to have a stab at that?
I would say yes in certain parts of the country, and I would have said particularly southeast England, because that's the area where aquifer sources are particularly important in terms of water supply. And it's also the area of the country where, you know, there's going to be particular pressures from a combination of both population, new housing, and climate change. So I could see that happening in certain areas where you've got a chalk aquifer and you've got the land that's key to recharge of that aquifer, and there's a need to provide that sort of benefit. So yes, I'm not sure it's there now, although of course water companies are paying land managers to alter particular practices, but I can see that coming in the future very definitely.
Okay.
And I think we're going to just have to slow the flow of water down. We're going to see higher rainfall events, and we've just got to look at our land asset and say, where could I slow water down? Where can I allow it to bridge out and make a wider corridor? Because we're allowing it to escape too quickly and then complain a few weeks later it's too dry. Yeah. And replacing those aquifers, holding water on farm, even if it's just for a few more days, allows it to soak into the ground better. And I think that's going to be a real key driver for the future.
Yeah, quite right. Okay, I'm going to try the next question, unless either of you want to. What level of risk do you see in the possible tax treatment of farmland and natural capital income by HMRC? Well, I'll focus on the natural capital income point because that's the sort of focus of this discussion. And it's a key point that we keep driving home with government. Government is spectacularly siloed in the way they think about things. And this is a classic example. I think it's next week. We are facilitating, believe this or not, a meeting between HMRC and DEFRA. We're getting them together. How they can't do it themselves, I'm not sure. But our tax team are facilitating a meeting between HMRC and DEFRA because they understand, and a key point that we are making to them is if ELMS is going to be a success, any sort of natural capital income streams it must be tax neutral for the farmer. If there's any suggestion that any of the tax benefits of farmland are taken away because you're going down an elms route or a biodiversity net gain or any of these other things, then of course it will be a massive own goal. So we are working on that. Martin, you wanted to come in.
It's something we've been trying to push is we want a working farmed landscape. As farmers, we deliver goods and different things, and that will definitely change over the next few years. But we want a farm at the heart, so it stays a taxation purpose. We're farmers. We may be producing timber, fibre and biodiversity, but that's a farmed asset. And that's why we need to keep it back to having a farmer key of delivering these things.
No, that's quite right. But there are terms in the tax rules about what defines a farmer, and it's important that we bring that up to date. Okay, next one, anonymous. Andrew recognizes productive agricultural land as natural capital. So should achieving higher yield of quality food be rewarded as a public good?
That's, as you know, a very long-standing debate. I think food production is very important, and I think the experience of the last 15 months has shown us just how important it is. I think you will be struggling to persuade government that they should support food production as a public good. If you think about the academic definition of a public good, then food production is not going to meet that definition. What I do think is important is that preserving the natural assets in such a way as to maintain food production potential in the future, that's where I think there is some leeway. Yeah, I can see that. Yes.
Yeah, and exactly, paying us to improve our soils, for example, which is a long-term good to food production, is what is going to come in SFI. Okay, I'm going to keep rattling forward. Do you think farmers that own cross-border land parcels, and in this example, England, Wales, are at a disadvantage with a newly established ELM scheme due to it being England only and other UK nations not being as advanced in establishing similar schemes? Might be an unfair one for two people sitting in the east of England, but what I would say there is, on the England-Wales point in particular, yes, Wales are behind, probably about a year behind, but I think it will be different cross-border. And where I live up in Northumberland, with Scotland will be different again, and we just have to work with those different schemes. I think in Wales, they will be going down a sort of public goods type model as well. It'll just be slightly different.
Yeah. I would add that in Wales, they are in some ways ahead of England in terms of trying to model the kinds of component elements of an ELMS scheme. So I agree it's likely to be challenging because the schemes will be different either side of the border, but that there may be possibilities from that as well.
Yeah, okay. Right, next one. What does ancient woodland Where does ancient woodland stand on the scale of things? In brackets, our sole land asset. I'm assuming that's this particular member's sole land asset. What might be marketable? Well, it stands about as high as you can get on the scale of good things to have. Andrew or Martin, would you like to add anything? I mean, it will be very much well supported within ELMS. And potentially in other areas. Who would like to add anything on that?
I think you've just about covered it. What is your management plan for that asset, and how you get, you're going to harvest some timber, do some other management tools. Where can you get revenue stream from it? But it's like the crown jewels of what we have in the landscape. But how do we connect what you've got there to your neighbours and wider landscape? And there will be future rewards for there is now for having that asset. Okay. Okay, next one. Have we got any clarity on who owns carbon up and down the supply chain? Farming is hard enough, but what about let property, especially residential? Depending on what view you take, it changes our carbon audit results by a factor of 20.
thus making it all rather pointless at the moment. So how do either of you see that? Do you think we should be looking just on our land that we operate, or looking at the property that sits on it as well?
It goes back to that standardization of what carbon, how it's going to measure. You may have someone with lots of land where the food's produced, but they may have a quarry or an industrial unit on the side that's emitting lots of carbon. How do you separate the assets off and account for them in different ways? But we do know each part of your asset has got to get to net zero by 2040, 2050. So we've got to change all of it, but it's certainly if the assets that we produce that sell on, where is the carbon? How do we account for the carbon footprint within those goods?
Yeah, I don't think Waitrose will be insisting. Well, what do I know? But if they're looking for net zero from the oats that come off my farm, they're not going to be looking at my holiday cottages. I don't think. I mean, somebody else will be, but I don't think Waitrose will be. Okay. Next one. Are those who are already doing a great job for the environment be disadvantaged, as it will be hard to show additionality, while degraded land may receive greater awards for smaller improvements they make? This is an extremely good question and it's very, very relevant. We had Dieter Helm come and talk to us, London branch, last year, and he was talking about this very much from a carbon point of view. The real problem with carbon, it's all about additionality, but I think my answer, and I'll open up to Andrew and Martin, is that for public money, for public goods, for ELMS, key thing in ELMS is it will be, if you're doing good things, you will be rewarded. If you've got you've got good assets, you will be rewarding to maintain those. If you've got, so it won't be purely about additionality. Andrew or Martin?
I would agree. I think the maintenance element is important, but if you have been working on these initiatives for a number of years and you've got key assets like certain types of habitat and so forth, that should also put you in a good position to be part of an initiative for the nature recovery or the landscape recovery tiers, those components. So I think it works both ways.
I'd say those who have been doing the good things in the past lots of them have been receiving public money to deliver that through stewardship schemes. So they should have an asset that can hit the ground running and get that public reward through ELM. What we will see is those that have lost natural capital and assets, and farmed hard to the very edge, will need to do a lot more, and they may be seen to be receiving a lot more money, but they've got a lot further to go to deliver that recovery in the landscape. So it's going to be a fair balance about putting the capital items back in, the hedgerows and bits and pieces, to the reward of having that hedgerow in your place. And how do we balance those payments?
Okay, thank you. So the last question I've got now is, we're being pushed on net gain to deliver it locally. Is this likely to be policy or just on the wish list? Happy to have a stab, but do either of you want to?
I believe once we've got the environmental bill, it will be done locally and nationally. We know many councils are looking at their own council holding or within a county council structure about how they double biodiversity if you're in Cambridgeshire, and how are they going to stimulate that change. So it's going to come very quick and fast at us, and we've got to be nimble as land managers on our feet to look at those opportunities of where we can engage and offer delivery and get best value from it.
I don't think it's going to simply be a matter of a wish list, but what I do think will be important is the monitoring of the schemes. So I think it's very important that frameworks are improved to try and monitor change in biodiversity over time. We don't necessarily have particularly good information about those things at the moment.
I mean, this is a question that I've asked. CLA did a very good series on biodiversity net gain back in October, and talking to the sort of lead within DEFRA who's developing this, I think what you will find is there will be a preference for local, because from a council point of view, they want, if there's 500 houses going up on the edge of Cambridge, they don't really want the benefit of the biodiversity net gain taking place in Cumbria as much as the Cumbrian farmer might quite fancy taking it. So I think there will be a preference for local, and potentially as you go further afield, you might have to do more. But that framework is being worked on, but it hasn't been completely finalized yet. So I think that is all the questions, and on my clock on my computer it's 1 minute to 3, so that's perfect timing. So I would just like to a big thank you to Martin and to Andrew for joining us this afternoon. It was really informative and interesting, and certainly got me thinking, and I'm particularly going to look up the Natural Capital Asset Register that Andrew mentioned for my own sake at home. And just before we close, I'd just like to highlight a couple of things. One is the guidance notes that the policy team have done on natural capital over the last few months. I mean, you can see the numbers there. They're all on our on the website, the New Look website. So please do look those up and download them. They're extremely helpful to start you thinking. And they're also ongoing events on this theme of natural capital. You can see them set out there as far as other events coming up. Sorry, those are just particular events for the Eastern region. Good. Well, thank you. And if you've got any feedback, please do send it in. And with that, I will say thank you very much.